Chapter 1. An animal of no significance. Let's rewind the clock. No, way more than that. We're not talking years or centuries. We're going billions of years back. The show started with a bang, literally. The Big Bang. That's when matter, energy, space, and time made their entrance. Physics took the stage. Fast forward a few 100,000 years, and matter and energy started to dance. They formed atoms. Atoms flirted and fused, became molecules. Chemistry was born. Then, on a pale blue dot called Earth, some of these molecules decided to get really fancy. They turned into life. Biology stepped in. But things didn't get truly weird until much, much later, just 70,000 years ago. That's when a certain primate, Homo sapiens, started behaving in ways no other creature had before. We began weaving stories, big stories. That moment flipped the switch. History, as we know it, began. Before that, we were just another animal. Nothing special. You wouldn't have bet a dime on us. If you had wandered around East Africa 2 million years ago, you'd have found a familiar scene. Mothers cradling their babies, kids messing around in the mud. The occasional chest-thumping macho trying to impress someone, a scene that wouldn't look too out of place among chimpanzees. We laughed, we played, we had social drama, but so did baboons. The truth is, we were just another face in the crowd. We weren't born special. We didn't have glowing auras or laser eyes. Our ancestors were utterly ordinary, just one of many human species wandering the globe. That's right, we weren't the only ones. The world used to be a lot more crowded. There were other humans. Not metaphorically. Literally. Cousins. Siblings. The Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia. Stocky, tough, built for the Ice Age. Homo erectus in East Asia. One of the most long-lived human species. Homo floresiensis, tiny folks on an island in Indonesia, barely a meter tall. Denisovans in Siberia. And more we haven't even found yet. Once, we shared this planet with them. So what happened? We outlasted them. Maybe we killed them. Maybe we absorbed some of them into our gene pool. But when the dust settled, only we remained. Let's zoom in on what made us, and all these cousins, human. Biologists lump creatures into species. A species is basically a group that has babies together, and those babies can have more babies. Horses and donkeys don't quite make the cut because their offspring, mules, are sterile. But spaniels and bulldogs? Same species, different vibe. Several species can share the same genus. It's like being part of a big extended family. For example, lions, tigers, and leopards are all Panthera. We, Homo sapiens, are one of the many past members of Homo. And just like all cats, trace their roots back to some ancient feline grandma. All humans, Neanderthals, Erectus, Sapiens, share a common ancestor. Here's the thing. We weren't alone. For most of human history, there were multiple humans, not in the poetic sense, but in the literal, biological, walking around sense. So, why are we the only ones left? That's a mystery. But let's keep walking. Our big brains are part of the puzzle. Compared to other animals, our brains are enormous, but they're expensive. Not in dollars, in energy. They use a quarter of our resting body's calories, while chimpanzee brains only burn through 8%. And to feed that greedy organ, we had to sacrifice. Smaller guts, weaker muscles, more time searching for food. And for what? For millions of years, we weren't exactly lighting up the scoreboard. We were small time, gathering plants, sneaking marrow from leftover bones after the lines were done. It wasn't glamorous. We walked upright, which gave us free hands, great for using tools. But upright walking also gave us back pain, stiff necks, and a childbirth crisis. Our heads were too big, our hips too narrow. The solution? Give birth earlier, when babies' brains are still mushy and small. The cost? Human babies are helpless for years. But this fragility created something powerful. We had to raise our kids in groups. We had to cooperate. That's where our social wiring came in. Humans are basically born premature, soft like molten glass. You can shape a human baby culturally, socially, ideologically, in a way no other animal can. Still, for all that, we weren't kings yet. We weren't even dukes. Our ancestors spent most of their time running from predators, picking berries, cracking bones for marrow. We weren't mighty hunters. We were clever scavengers, middle of the food chain. Until we weren't. At some point, maybe 400,000 years ago, we started hunting big game. And then, 100,000 years ago, Homo sapiens rocketed up the food chain. We didn't climb slowly like lions or sharks. We jumped. That leap had consequences. We didn't evolve with power. We grabbed it almost overnight. And like a kid who suddenly wins the lottery, we didn't know how to handle it. We became anxious, aggressive, paranoid, and that made us dangerous. Then came fire. At first, we borrowed fire. Maybe lightning struck, and we took the embers. But eventually, we learned how to control it. Fire let you cook, which was revolutionary. It softened food, killed bacteria, made chewing easier. It shortened our intestines, freed up energy, and possibly helped grow our brains. More than anything, fire made us the only animal that could manipulate nature without needing claws or fangs. Fire made the impossible possible. One woman with a fire stick could clear a forest. Still, even with fire, around 150,000 years ago, we were barely a footnote. Just a few sapiens hanging out in East Africa. Then came the big wave. Around 70,000 years ago, something clicked. We left Africa again, and this time we took over. What happened to the others? Neanderthals, Denisovans, Erectus? That's debated. Maybe we made it with them. Maybe we fought them. Maybe both. The truth is in our DNA. Eurasians carry some Neanderthal genes. Melanesians carry Denisovan traces. But not much, just fragments. So, no, we didn't exactly merge. We didn't totally replace. We probably did a bit of everything. But the end result was the same. They vanished. We stayed. And here we are, one lonely species where once there were many. The last human standing. But why us? What made us special? Why did we thrive while our brothers faded? That's what we'll explore next. Because the secret wasn't in our muscles. It wasn't in our tools. It was in our minds and our stories. And that, my friend, is where the plot truly thickens. Let me paint you a scene. You're standing somewhere in East Africa, maybe near a river 70,000 years ago. The air is warm, the sun bright. A small band of humans, they look just like us, is figuring out how to survive. They're not inventing rockets or painting caves yet, just surviving, gathering fruit, running from lions, occasionally losing to the neighbors. Before that moment, for thousands of years, Homo sapiens wasn't doing anything particularly special. Sure, we had big brains, we walked upright, we could make stone tools, but so could other human species. Neanderthals had even thicker bones, used fire, and took care of their injured. Erectus had been walking around for 2 million years already. We weren't winning any evolutionary awards. Then something shifted. Around 70,000 years ago, we changed. Not physically, our bodies stayed the same. But up here, in our minds, something rewired. We started thinking differently, imagining, creating, talking like no other species could. That shift, it's what we now call the cognitive revolution. And it changed everything. See, those early sapiens before the shift, they probably couldn't grasp abstract ideas. You couldn't explain a myth or a joke to them. You couldn't sit them down and teach them algebra, or even how to imagine a line that wasn't in front of them. But after the cognitive revolution, suddenly, humans were imagining things that didn't exist. They were drawing on cave walls, carving figurines, dreaming up gods. So, what sparked this leap? Nobody knows for sure. The best guess is that a random genetic mutation tweaked the wiring of our brains. It wasn't planned. It wasn't a divine upgrade, just pure evolutionary dice rolling. And boom, language, imagination, gossip, art, belief systems. All of it started swirling in our heads like a storm. That's the magic of our language. It's not just about sounds or words. Monkeys have calls. Birds sing songs. Even dolphins communicate. But we do something unique. We tell stories about things that aren't real. Think about that for a second. A monkey might yell, "Careful, eagle," and the others will scatter. But a human can say, "Yesterday, near the river bend, I saw an eagle circling a herd of deer, and I think there's a new nesting spot up there behind the cliffs." That sentence carries location, memory, prediction, and meaning. And more importantly, humans can say something like, "That eagle is the guardian spirit of our tribe." Now you're in the realm of fiction. No other creature does that, not even close. And it's fiction, the ability to imagine things that don't exist, that allowed us to cooperate in huge numbers, bigger than any family, bigger than any tribe of apes. See, chimps are social too. They groom each other. They make alliances, but they top out at about 50 to 60 individuals. Beyond that, they can't keep track of who's who. You don't trust someone you don't know personally. But humans? We invented gossip. Yes, gossip. The juicy, whispered, "Did you hear what she said?" kind of stuff. And surprisingly, gossip was our first killer app. It let us talk about who could be trusted, who cheated, who was a good ally, who stole food, who lied. That let small bands grow. 10 people became 30. 30 became 50. And as soon as you could talk behind someone's back, you could also plan behind it. You could organize. Eventually, sapiens learned to believe in shared fictions. Gods, nations, honor, money. These were stories everyone agreed on. You and I don't know each other personally, but if we both believe in the same law, the same currency, the same flag, we can work together. That's massive. This is why humans dominate the planet. Not because we're the strongest or fastest, but because we're the only species that can build imaginary realities and then live inside them together. We invented myths, not just to escape reality, but to build it. And that's the thing. You can't convince a monkey to give you a banana by promising him endless bananas in monkey heaven. But you can convince a human to work overtime, give up his life, or go to war, all for a flag, a crown, or the hope of a better afterlife. Strange, isn't it? Fiction sounds like a weakness, but in truth, it's our greatest strength. Because it lets thousands, even millions of strangers trust each other. And once you have trust at scale, you get tribes, kingdoms, empires. You get history. Sure, bees and ants can coordinate too, but they do it with hardwired instincts. You can't convince ants to switch queens or form a startup. Chimps cooperate, but only in small circles. Only humans can cooperate flexibly in large numbers and change the rules when needed. And it all started with stories. So when we talk about the cognitive revolution, we're not just talking about smarter thinking. We're talking about the birth of belief, of legends, of religions, of nations, of cultures. This was the moment our ancestors stopped reacting to the world and started inventing it. And it's only the beginning, because now that we had stories, we started using them to reshape the land beneath our feet. The next stop on this wild journey? Farming, settlements, civilization. But let me warn you, what comes next isn't necessarily progress. Some stories, it turns out, are beautiful lies that trap us. Let's keep going. Let's take a deep breath and forget everything you know about history books. Forget kings and wars and empires. Forget pyramids and palaces. Let's go way back to a time before cities, before farming, before we became the rulers of the world. Let's talk about the real sapiens, the 99% of our history, when we lived not as office workers or soldiers, but as foragers. If you really want to understand humans, you need to understand the forager lifestyle. That was our default setting. Imagine your ancestors waking up in a world without alarms or breakfast cereals. No clocks, no bosses, no email. Just the sun, the wind, the smell of the earth, and maybe a few berries. Now, before you picture some caveman grunting and dragging a club, stop. That's Hollywood garbage. In truth, foragers were probably more in tune with their bodies and their surroundings than we are today. They knew which plants were edible, which roots healed wounds, which animals left tracks by the river overnight. They had sharp eyes, sharp ears, sharp minds. In fact, if you took a forager baby and raised her today in New York or London, she'd probably outscore your kid on every test. Her brain is wired for survival, for flexibility, for imagination. And their lives? Not as nasty or brutish as people think. Sure, they didn't live to 80, but they didn't sit in traffic either. Their days were dynamic. One morning might be about picking mushrooms, the next, hunting a rabbit. They spent fewer hours working than most of us do today. They had free time for storytelling, playing, bonding. They weren't glued to a screen or trapped behind a plow. And socially, things were weirdly equal. See, foragers couldn't really hoard stuff. You can't carry 50 coconuts with you, so wealth didn't pile up, which meant no kings, no landlords, no billionaires. It was a kind of enforced equality. That doesn't mean there was no drama. Humans will always bicker, but everyone had to pull their weight, or at least be liked enough to be tolerated. There were no rulers, but there were influencers. That funny guy who told stories at night. He probably had more power than anyone. Also, gender roles weren't set in stone. In many groups, women gathered most of the food, and men hunted, but it wasn't rigid. In some tribes today, women do the hunting too. Or lead, or tell the tribe where to move next. The patriarchy we know is a much more recent invention. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wasn't it dangerous? Absolutely. A snake bite could kill you. A bad storm could ruin your week. There were no antibiotics, no dentists. But here's the flip side. No taxes, no bureaucracy, no wage slavery. When things were good, they were really good. Clean air, a tight-knit community, and a direct relationship with the world around you. And perhaps most surprisingly, they weren't as violent as we often imagine. Sure, there were conflicts. No species is without its dark moments. But when anthropologists study modern foraging societies, they often find a surprising level of cooperation and conflict resolution. In fact, compared to the farmers and industrial societies that came later, foragers killed each other less often, not more. So let's clear up a myth. No, foragers weren't peaceful hippies living in a love commune. But they also weren't savage brutes. They were us, just with fewer tools and more freedom. But here's the twist in the tale. For all their wisdom, their adaptability, and their healthy lifestyles, they were vulnerable. Not to predators, but to their own success. Because as their numbers slowly grew, so did their impact. More people meant more mouths to feed, more hunting, more gathering, more pressure on nature. And one day, someone did something that would change everything. They planted a seed. And when they did, the world tilted on its axis. But we'll get to that. For now, just remember, the real Adam and Eve didn't live in a garden with forbidden fruit. They lived in forests and savannas. They didn't wear fig leaves. They wore fur, bark, or nothing at all. They didn't fall from paradise. They left it, chasing something they thought would be better. Let's see how that turned out. Let's imagine something. You're part of a small foraging band. You've lived your whole life moving with the seasons. You know every plant, every animal, every rock within 100 miles. You don't know much, but you've got freedom, stories, laughter, and time. Then one day, you come across something terrifying. Another group of humans, just like you, have burned down part of the forest. Not for warmth, not to cook. They did it to change the land, to make it theirs. And just like that, the rules of the game shift. That's what happened when Sapiens started spreading across the world, fast, clever, and full of fire. Once we developed the cognitive tools, language, imagination, cooperation, we exploded out of Africa. And we didn't just move in. We replaced what was already there. Everywhere we went, the native species disappeared. Not just other humans like Neanderthals and Denisovans. Whole ecosystems collapse under the weight of our curiosity and appetite. Let's start with the first big wave, Australia. Before humans arrived, it was a land of giants. Kangaroos as tall as basketball players. Wombats the size of hippos. Flightless birds bigger than ostriches. Giant lizards and snakes. Even a marsupial lion. Within just a few thousand years of Homo sapiens landing there, most of them were gone. Now, climate change might have played a small part, but the speed and timing suggest something else. Us. Think about it. We didn't need to kill everything directly. Just a few big fires, a few overhunted species, a disruption in the balance, and the whole system falls like dominoes. Then we did it again. And again. We reached the Americas about 16,000 years ago. And guess what? Same pattern. Saber-toothed cats, mammoths, giant sloths, camels, horses. Yes, America had native horses. All gone within a couple thousand years of our arrival. Coincidence? Not likely. Now, picture it from their perspective. You're a mammoth in a cold northern forest. For thousands of years, you've dealt with predators, wolves, big cats. You've got tricks for them. You know how to stand your ground. But this new creature, it's different. It walks on two legs. It throws sharp sticks from far away. It works in teams. And it thinks ahead. You never saw it coming. By the time you realize your prey, it's already over. This mass extinction didn't just change nature. It changed us. See, once we removed the big animals, the forest grew thicker. The landscape changed. Our diets changed. We became both more powerful and more dependent on tools. Once you've wiped out your main food source, you need to get clever, fast. And it wasn't just meat. We also started reshaping plant life, burning areas to make gathering easier, spreading certain seeds by accident or intention. Already, before the first farm was ever planted, we were acting like mini-gods over nature. And here's the cruel irony. For most of our evolutionary history, we weren't on top. We were prey. We were cautious, quiet, careful. But once we gained language and fire, our position flipped. And we didn't handle it gracefully. It's like we inherited a huge weapon and no instruction manual. And as we moved from one untouched paradise to the next, we brought the same storm. Fire, hunger, imagination, and destruction. Like a flood, we rolled across continents, drowning the old world in our own rising tide. The story of Sapiens isn't just about invention and brilliance. It's also about forgetting what we destroy in the process. By the time the next chapter begins, when we finally settle down and plant roots, the earth is already quieter, less wild, less giant. But don't worry, we're just getting started. Because the next mistake we make, it won't be quick like a hunt. It'll be slow, seductive, and it will trap us for thousands of years. Ready for history's biggest fraud? Let's talk about farming. So here we are, standing on the edge of the greatest turning point in human history. The moment when our ancestors stopped wandering and started planting. It sounds like a smart upgrade, right? Farming, settlements, progress. Except, what if I told you it was a scam? Let's back up. For nearly 200,000 years, Homo sapiens lived as foragers, hunting, gathering, moving with the seasons. Life wasn't easy, but it was flexible, diverse, nutritionally rich, and for the most part, it worked. Then about 12,000 years ago, in several spots around the world, something changed. Someone, maybe out of boredom, maybe out of desperation, dropped a wild seed into the soil and decided to wait. That little act snowballed. Wheat in the Middle East, rice in China, corn in Central America, potatoes in the Andes, sorghum in Africa. Plants that had once been just part of the menu became the centerpiece of our lives, and slowly, the game flipped. Instead of humans shaping nature, nature began shaping us. Wheat didn't domesticate overnight. It took time, but it was sneaky. Each year, it demanded more water, more sun, more attention. We cleared forests for it, We dug irrigation channels. We chased off animals who tried to nibble it. We built fences. We toiled in the mud. And what did wheat give us? Calories, lots of them, which meant more babies. But here's the con. The individual human didn't benefit. The species did. As a species, we exploded. Populations grew fast. More kids survived. Villages turned into towns. But the average forager-turned-farmer? Their life got worse. The diet narrowed. Bread, porridge, maybe some onions. Less protein, less variety, more backbreaking labor. Malnutrition spiked. So did disease. Why? Because you're now living shoulder to shoulder with dozens, sometimes hundreds, of other people, animals, and sewage. You can't just move when things get bad. You're rooted. And roots come with rot. And yet, no one stopped. Because once you go agricultural, you can't go back. Think about it. A village of 200 farmers needs every hand working to grow food. You can't say, hey, let's all go back to hunting deer and picking berries. There aren't enough deer left. The forest's gone. You've got mouths to feed. The system becomes a trap. You didn't choose it. It chose you. And that's why we call farming history's biggest fraud. It promised abundance, but delivered dependency. Promised ease, but demanded endless effort. It made kings rich and peasants poor. It laid the foundation for cities and empires, but it also created hierarchy, oppression, and organized misery. And it wasn't just plants that got domesticated. We got domesticated. Our bodies shrank. Our brains may have too. We became more docile, more routine, more predictable, like oxen yoked to a plow. Yes, farming built the foundation for everything we call civilization: writing, money, kings, gods, skyscrapers. But don't confuse progress with happiness. You can climb the ladder and still feel trapped. In fact, the people who started farming probably never said, "This is better." They said, "This is necessary." And that's the tragedy. It didn't happen because it was the best way to live. It happened because once a few groups did it, everyone else had to follow or be pushed aside. If your neighbors start farming and growing faster, they'll need more land, which means your land. So you have two choices: join them or run. That's the great irony. The agricultural revolution wasn't a bold leap into the future. It was a slow slide into dependency. And yet, it set the stage for everything to come: cities, empires, religions, kings. But also something new: stories of purpose. Myths to explain why some people rule, why others obey, and why this hard life is somehow noble. Because once you've locked millions of people into hard labor, you need a story powerful enough to make them stay. Let's see what story they built next. Once we settled down and embraced farming, willingly or not, we needed a new system to organize ourselves. You can't have thousands of people living in one place without rules, order, and most importantly, a story. Because if we're being honest, most people don't like being told what to do. So instead of brute force 24/7, society came up with a smarter tool: shared myths. Beliefs that made people accept their role, whether that meant carrying water or wearing a crown. Enter hierarchy. Now, not all hierarchies are bad. Every group, even a playground full of kids, has some pecking order. But the hierarchies that emerged after the agricultural revolution were different. They weren't about talent or trust. They were about birth, about skin, about gender, about what name you were given and where you stood in the grand fictional structure of society. And at the very top of this new pyramid, kings, priests, nobles, people who claimed they were closer to the gods or even chosen by them. Why did others believe it? Because they were taught to, from the moment they could speak. If you're born a peasant and someone tells you, "The gods made it this way," what choice do you have? If questioning the system means angering heaven or being whipped, you learn to accept it, maybe even defend it. These hierarchies were held together by stories. Grand, elegant, sometimes brutal. Stories written in stone, chanted in temples, whispered by parents to their kids at bedtime. And they weren't always lies. Some people really believed they were superior. Others believed they were cursed. These myths didn't just serve the powerful. They shaped the thoughts and dreams of everyone, top to bottom. Take race. Biologically, race is basically meaningless. You and a stranger from the other side of the world could be 99.9% identical in your DNA, but socially? Race has been used for centuries to sort people into boxes, some given advantages, others locked out. Why? Because a story was told, over and over, loud enough to drown out the truth. And it wasn't just race. Caste systems in India, slavery in America, class divisions in medieval Europe. Everywhere you looked, humans invented layers. Some got golden robes. Others got the plow. And then there's gender. In many societies, women were pushed into smaller roles, told they were weaker, quieter, meant to obey. But this wasn't a law of nature. It was a social story. A fiction so deeply embedded that even women often believed it. Biology made us male or female. Culture told us what that meant. Some societies were more balanced. Some gave women power. But as agriculture hardened in the kingdoms, most hierarchies tightened, and men, usually bigger and more violent, claimed the throne. Over time, these social orders became self-reinforcing. The rich got better food, better education, better health. Their kids inherited their position. Meanwhile, the poor were told that obedience was virtuous and that suffering would be rewarded, maybe not now, but in the next life. You see where this is going, right? The real genius of ancient societies wasn't the plow or the wheel. It was the ability to make millions of people believe in imaginary orders and behave as if they were real. That's how we built pyramids. Not just the ones in Egypt, but every system where a few stood on the backs of many. You need more than slaves to build a pyramid. You need a story powerful enough to convince the slaves that the pyramid matters. And maybe it did, to them. Maybe it still does to us. Because here's the hard truth. Most of us are still living inside pyramids. Still playing roles handed down by invisible scripts. Still calling fiction reality. But to see the Matrix, you have to ask, who wrote the story? Who benefits? And most dangerously of all, what happens if we stop believing? Before we go there, though, let's talk about memory. Because when stories get too complex and people get too many, you can't just rely on gossip or tradition anymore. You need records. You need writing. You need to remember. Okay, so you've got this booming agricultural society, thousands of people, fields to manage, grain to count, taxes to collect, offerings to the gods, soldiers to feed. Gossip alone doesn't cut it anymore. Your brain, as remarkable as it is, hits a wall. Because here's the thing, human memory has limits. We're great at remembering faces. We're decent at remembering who owes us a favor. But try keeping track of every farmer's grain yield, how much they owe the temple, who paid last month, who's late, and your brain goes, nope, that's too much. That's where writing steps in. Not as some sudden genius invention, but as a life raft. We didn't invent writing to write poems or express emotions. We invented it to track taxes. The earliest scripts weren't tales of heroes or love letters. They were spreadsheets on clay. Think of a temple accountant in Mesopotamia. He doesn't need an epic. He needs to know if Farmer Nabu delivered 37 sacks of barley or 36. So they began making marks. At first, simple tokens. A pebble meant 1 goat. A stick meant 10 jars of oil. Eventually, those turned into symbols on clay tablets. And boom, you've got the earliest bookkeeping system. Writing wasn't about self-expression. It was bureaucracy's best friend. And here's the twist. Once we started using external memory, writing, tokens, ledgers, we could expand our societies even more. Why? Because we weren't limited by what people could remember. We outsourced memory to stone. And once writing existed, it didn't stop at barley and goats. People realized they could write anything, laws, myths, prayers, gossip. And slowly, that changed our relationship with truth. See, before writing, all knowledge had to be passed from one person to another, mouth to mouth. If you told a story, you had to remember it or slightly reinvent it. Knowledge was flexible, living, adaptable. But writing froze it, made it fix. A written law couldn't be argued with. A written command had weight. And suddenly, whoever controlled writing controlled the story. Priests, scribes, kings, they weren't just keeping records. They were shaping reality. And literacy? It wasn't for everyone. In most ancient societies, only a tiny elite could read or write. Everyone else was told what was written, but couldn't check for themselves, which means early writing wasn't democratizing. It was gatekeeping. It gave incredible power to a small group of people, those who could manipulate symbols, create ledgers, inscribe divine orders into stone. And here's where it gets really interesting. Writing allowed systems to grow more complex and more detached from human life. You didn't need to know Farmer Nabu personally anymore. You just needed his tablet entry. You didn't need to trust someone. Just trust their name in a ledger. It sounds modern, right? That's because it is the foundation of modern bureaucracy. And like today, it came with benefits. And costs? On the plus side, you could build empires. Coordinate vast resources, record history. On the downside, you build a world where numbers mattered more than faces, where what was written became more real than what was felt, where people could be turned into entries, taxes, or debts, and forgotten as humans. So while memory overload was the problem that gave birth to writing, the solution itself became a tool of power. It let kings rule without ever seeing their subjects. Let temples tax without lifting a sword. Let merchants trade with strangers thousands of miles away, using ink instead of trust. And most importantly, it let stories scale. Now myths, laws, religions, and empires could be spread not just by word of mouth, but by script. Carved into stone, copied on the scrolls, passed through generations like treasure. Memory had limits, but writing? Writing made us immortal. It also made it easier to forget what mattered most. Because when numbers run the world, what happens to justice? Let's talk about that next. Let's get honest. History isn't fair. It never was. Not when it was carved in stone. Not when it was sung by bards. And not when it's written in your kid's school textbook. Because if you look closely, you'll notice something. Almost every organized human society has been built on inequality. Not by accident, by design. From ancient kingdoms to modern democracies, there's always a system, a hierarchy. Some are born to rule, others to serve. Some walk red carpets. Others dig ditches. And what justifies all this? A story. Whether it's the divine right of kings, karma, bloodlines, race, gender, or test scores, every inequality rides on the back of a narrative. Something people believe in so deeply, they stop questioning it. Take caste. For over 2,000 years, India operated under a strict caste system. You were born into your role. If you were a Brahmin, congratulations, you were top tier, a priest closer to the gods. If you were a Dalit, an untouchable, you were at the bottom, and there was no ladder. No escape. Just generations of know your place. And yet, people accepted it. Why? Because the story was everywhere, in rituals, in temples, in bedtime tales. Children didn't need to be forced. They were raised into the script. Sound harsh? It's not unique. Europe, for centuries, told a different story. The nobility were born noble. Peasants were meant to work the land. Slaves? God's will. Women? Too emotional for politics. Black people? Born to serve. Asians? Exotic, but not quite equal. And people believed it, not because it was true, but because it was normal. Here's the kicker. Most inequalities aren't based on real biological differences. They're built from thin air, wrapped in culture, and reinforced by repetition. Science doesn't support the idea that one race is smarter than another, or one sex is naturally more obedient. But once a myth becomes law, becomes education, becomes tradition, it doesn't matter what's true. People live it anyway. And these myths become sticky, hard to unlearn, even after the laws change. Slavery is illegal now. Women can vote. Colonies have become nations. But the residue of those old stories, still there. In salaries, in boardrooms, in how people are treated in hospitals, airports, and classrooms. Because myths don't die easily, especially the ones that keep someone on top. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Even the winners in these systems aren't always free. The elite in ancient China had to follow rigid codes. Nobles in Europe had to marry appropriately. Even kings couldn't love who they wanted or laugh too loud in public. The system didn't just cage the poor. It caged everyone. It still does. You think the CEO working 100-hour weeks feels free? You think the beauty queen obsessed with her weight feels powerful? We all live in invisible scripts. Some get more applause, some get more bruises. But most of us aren't writing our own parts. And yet the biggest myth of all? That inequality is natural, that it's always been this way. That humans are just selfish and competitive, and there's no other option. Not true. Foragers live differently, with more fluidity, more sharing, more adaptability. Even early agricultural villages had cooperation without kings. We weren't born to bow. We learned to, and that means we can unlearn it too. But first, we have to stop looking at history as a story of inevitable greatness and start seeing it as a story of choices, many of them deeply unfair, deeply painful. Because once you accept that the world we live in is built on myths, you might start asking the most dangerous question of all. What if we built new ones? Let's keep going. The next chapter reveals just how myths became tools of mass control, and how humans were united not by love, but by shared fictions. Take a step back and look at the world, not just your neighborhood, but the whole thing. Billions of people, thousands of cultures, hundreds of nations, and yet somehow we're all tangled up in the same giant story. How did that happen? How did people who used to live in tiny, scattered bands, each with their own gods, rules, and rhythms, end up following the same empires, using the same money, and praying to shockingly similar skies? The answer: history has a direction, not a purpose, not a plan, but a direction. That direction? Toward unification. Unification doesn't mean peace, or justice, or love. It means that over the past thousands of years, humans have slowly, sometimes violently, merged their little tribes into bigger and bigger groups. From clans to kingdoms, from kingdoms to empires, from empires to global corporations and international law. And what glued these vast groups together? Not biology, not love, shared myths. 3 in particular. 1. Money. 2. Empires. 3. Religion. We'll unpack all 3 in the coming chapters. But right now, let's focus on the bigger picture. Imagine a world map 10,000 years ago. It's not divided into countries. It's a mosaic of small human bubbles, each with its own language, diet, and way of life. One tribe worships river spirits. Another thinks rocks are sacred. They might live just 50 miles apart and have no idea the other exists. Fast forward to today. People from Argentina to South Korea wear jeans, scroll Instagram, use credit cards, and argue over Marvel movies. That's unification. So, how did we get here? Partly by accident, partly by violence, and mostly by storytelling. Every empire that conquered new land brought its own gods, its own currency, its own law. But to rule effectively, they had to persuade the conquered people to play along. That's where universal orders, big, all-encompassing ideas came in. Ideas like, we're all children of the same God. Or, all humans are equal before the emperor. Or even, this coin is accepted everywhere. Trust me, these weren't always true. But if enough people believed them, they became real. Unification didn't mean uniformity. Cultures stayed diverse. People kept their food, their clothing, their music. But they slowly agreed to follow the same systems. systems of trade, law, faith, and that changed everything. It allowed a merchant in Baghdad to do business with a trader from Venice without ever meeting him before. It let kings in China and Europe write treaties without speaking the same language, as long as they shared the same logic: hierarchy, tribute, legitimacy. But let's be clear, this wasn't a smooth ride. It came with blood, with war, with slavery, with people forced to abandon their gods or their language under the shadow of a sword. Unification is not the same as harmony. Often, it's just domination wrapped in gold. But over time, despite the violence, a strange thing happened. People started to adopt the systems not just out of fear, but out of want. Why? Because these systems offered things their old tribes couldn't: larger networks, better tools, access to luxuries, trade opportunities, military protection, even meaning. An empire might have crushed your village, but it also built the road that let your grandkids study mathematics. And the arrow kept moving, from dozens of currencies to a handful of global ones, from hundreds of religions to a few dominant faiths, from local barter to global trade networks so dense you can drink Colombian coffee in a Tokyo cafe while checking stocks in London. Now, does this mean history is always progress? No, not even close. Sometimes the arrow curves. Sometimes it spirals into collapse. Rome fell. The Mongols retreated. Colonialism fractured. But even then, the idea of one world, interconnected, bound by shared structures, kept crawling forward. And today, that idea is everywhere. The UN, the Olympics, international law, human rights, climate treaties. All of it points to a global we, a collective human identity, fragile, messy, incomplete, but undeniably real. So yes, history has an arrow. And for the last few millennia, it's been pointing toward together. The question is, what are we doing with it? Because now that we've got a global civilization, we're starting to see its cracks. Inequality, climate crisis, cultural erasure, tech addiction, war with digital weapons. The unification story got us this far, but what comes next? First, let's zoom in on one of the most powerful unifiers ever invented. It's invisible. It doesn't smell, doesn't rot, and doesn't bleed. And yet, it moves armies and shapes dreams. Let's talk about money. Take a crumpled bill out of your wallet or glance at your banking app. See that number? That's not food. It's not a house. It's not anything real. But it can become all of those things. Why? Because enough people believe it can. That's money in a nutshell. The most successful story humans ever told. It's not gold. It's not paper. It's not even numbers on a screen. It's trust. Money is the universal fiction we've all agreed to play along with, regardless of culture, religion, background, or beliefs. Christian, atheist, Buddhist, capitalist, communist, we all understand that $100 is worth more than $10. It's the one story nearly everyone on Earth is fluent in. And that's why it's so powerful. Now, let's rewind. Before money, humans used barter. You had chickens, I had grain, we traded. Simple, right? Wrong. Barter works when everyone wants what the other has at the same time. But what if I need a goat and all you want is pottery? We're stuck. That's called the coincidence of one's problem, and it wrecks efficiency. Enter money. At first, it wasn't coins. It could be cowrie shells, salt, cloth, even cigarettes in prison. Anything that lots of people agreed had value. Eventually, society started using standardized money, objects that had agreed upon worth and could last a long time without spoiling. Metal was perfect, durable, easy to carry, hard to fake. And from there came coins. Governments, or kings, minted them with symbols to guarantee their value. A stamped coin wasn't just silver. It was a message. You can trust this. We say so. That's when money really became a tool of authority. And later? Paper money, banknotes, digital money, crypto. But the core idea never changed. Money is made of stories. Because money has no value unless people believe in it. And belief, as you've seen, is our superpower. Think about it. What makes a dollar worth a dollar? Not the paper, not the ink. It's because we all agree it can buy things. It's because the government backs it. It's because shops accept it. Because the entire system of your life runs on it. If tomorrow morning everyone woke up and decided dollars were worthless, they would be. That's terrifying and brilliant. Because it means money is not a material thing, but a network of trust. The world's most fluid, scalable, and adaptable myth. And that's exactly why it became the backbone of empires. When kings wanted to rule vast territories, they needed to pay soldiers, build roads, buy loyalty. Money let them do that. When merchants wanted to trade across deserts or oceans, they needed something everyone would accept. Money delivered. Unlike religion or politics, which divide people, money unites. You don't need to love the same God to trade. You just need to agree on the price. And here's the wild part. Money didn't just lubricate trade. It shaped values. In the past, things were valuable because they were sacred. A cow might be holy, a day might be holy, a river might be holy. Money changed that. It made things valuable because they could be bought or sold. It didn't ask, is this sacred? It asked, how much? And once you answer that question, a new logic takes over, one that sees the world through price tags. Is that good? Well, money makes peace possible between strangers. It lets you get food from someone you've never met, across a sea you've never seen, who speaks a language you don't understand. But it also makes it easy to forget what can't be bought. Love, meaning, dignity. Because when everything has a price, everything becomes negotiable, even human lives. Still, we can't live without money now. It's too useful, too embedded, too elegant. It's the most efficient system for turning stories into action, dreams into buildings, time into things. So yes, money smells like power, like greed, like comfort. But more than anything, it smells like trust. The trust of billions of people playing the same invisible game. And it's this trust that made empires possible. So let's meet the next giant in our story, the empire. The ultimate machine for turning belief into borders. Close your eyes and imagine an empire. Maybe you see Roman legions marching across dusty roads, or British ships docking in foreign ports, or towering palaces ruled by mighty emperors. But what really is an empire? It's not just land, not just soldiers, not even just power. An empire is when one group of people rules over many others, often with different languages, beliefs, customs, and keeps them all under one system. One law, one ruler, one imagined order, and it's always been about more than brute force. Sure, armies mattered, but the most successful empires didn't just conquer bodies, they conquered minds. They built roads, issued coins, made laws, and more importantly, told stories. Stories that said, we are superior, we bring civilization. You're lucky to be ruled by us. Those stories made submission feel like progress. Now, empires come in many flavors. Some were brutal, burning cities to the ground. Others were smooth talkers, winning hearts with culture and infrastructure. But all of them had one thing in common. They expanded, because staying still meant dying. Expansion gave them more resources, more taxes, more slaves, more prestige. And yet, here's the twist. While empires crushed some cultures, they also spread others. The Roman Empire spread Greek philosophy. The Islamic caliphates preserved ancient science. The British spread the English language so well that you and I are speaking it right now. Empires are both destroyers and incubators. They erase and they plant, and they're full of contradictions. The same empire that enslaved millions might also have outlawed human sacrifice. The same one that waged wars could also fund universities and libraries. It's messy. It's human. Now, did people like being conquered? Of course not. Empires always have rebellions bubbling under the surface. But over time, many subjects adapted. Some even thrived under imperial rule, climbing the ranks, learning the language of power, turning colonization into opportunity. Because empires didn't just impose, they absorbed. They adopted foreign gods, married local elites, mixed languages, cuisines, traditions. That's why cultures today are such cocktails. Vietnamese cuisine, a mix of native traditions and French colonial influence. Mexican Catholicism, a blend of Spanish Christianity and native rituals. Even your morning tea might carry the fingerprints of imperial trade routes. But here's the kicker. No empire lasts forever. Not Rome, not the Mongols, not the Ottomans, not the British. They all cracked, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but always, eventually. Why? Because holding together so many people with so many tensions requires endless energy. And the bigger you get, the harder you fall. Still, empires left deep footprints. Borders, languages, railways, legal codes, flags, ethnic conflicts, even national pride or trauma. You live in a world shaped by empires, whether you know it or not. And though the age of old-school empires might be over, a new kind of empire is rising, built not with armies, but with data, brands, and algorithms. But before we jump into that future, we need to explore one more ancient unifier. It's older than money, older than empires. It's the first story that convinced people to kneel, obey, and believe together. Let's talk about religion. Think about the biggest crowds you've ever seen, stadiums, concerts, protests. Now imagine millions of people across centuries bowing their heads to the same God, saying the same prayers, following the same rituals. That's the scale of religion. Before nationalism, before capitalism, before science, religion was the glue that held huge groups of strangers together. It gave meaning, rules, belonging, a cosmic why behind the chaos of life. And like money or empires, religion is a kind of story. But not just any story, a sacred one. It doesn't just say, this is how things are. It says, this is how things must be, because a higher power said so. That's powerful. Now, early humans probably worshiped spirits in rivers, trees, animals. Everything had a soul. That's animism, and it made sense in a small tribe where nature was boss. But once farming started and cities formed, you needed something more centralized. Enter gods, thunder gods, sun gods, war gods, love goddesses. Each with a domain, a personality, a mood. These mythologies didn't just explain the world. They organized it. They said, here's how the universe works. Here's your role in it. And here's what happens if you mess up. Religion was also an early form of law enforcement. No cops? No problem. The gods are watching, and they don't need sleep. But religion evolved. Some cultures went polytheistic, worshiping many gods. Others, like the Hebrews, went monotheistic, claiming there's only one true God and everyone else is wrong. Monotheism didn't just simplify the cosmos, it raised the stakes. If there's only one God and you disobey, you're not just wrong, you're damned. And yet, even monotheistic religions didn't stay pure. Over time, saints, angels, devils, and demons slipped in. Old habits die hard. Religion also began to merge with empires. Kings ruled by divine right. Priests became political advisors. Sacred texts became legal codes. It wasn't just about the afterlife anymore. Religion now governed taxes, war, marriage, property, punishments, everything. Then came a new kind of religion, one that didn't need gods at all. Think about Buddhism. It doesn't focus on a creator god. It focuses on suffering and how to end it. It's more a method than a mythology. A path, not a person. Other belief systems followed suit: Confucianism, Taoism, even certain types of humanism. Systems that said, here's how to live a good life without necessarily invoking the supernatural. Still, most religions had one big thing in common. They believed their story was the truth and often tried to spread it, sometimes through kindness and charity, other times through swords and fire. Because religion wasn't just about comfort, it was about power. If you control the story of heaven, you control what people fear, what they hope for, what they'll die for. But here's where things get complicated. As the world got more interconnected through true trade, empires, and money, people started bumping into other religions, and they realized, wait, we can't all be right. So some religions adapted, softened, became more spiritual than dogmatic. Others dug in, hardened, and turned into battle flags. Religion, like everything else in Sapiens' story, is double-edged. It comforts and divides. It uplifts and oppresses. It builds hospitals and starts wars. But even in our so-called secular age, religion's fingerprints are everywhere. In our holidays, our moral codes, even our politics. We've replaced some sacred scrolls with constitutions, some churches with courts, some priests with therapists. But the deep human hunger for meaning, that's still very much alive. And speaking of meaning, there's one belief system today that unites more people than any god ever did. It doesn't offer paradise, just progress. It doesn't promise salvation, just growth. Let's talk about humanism. Imagine a world where the most sacred thing isn't a god, a prophet, or a holy book. It's you, your feelings, your thoughts, your choices. That's humanism. It's the radical idea that humans are the ultimate authority. That meaning doesn't come from the sky, but from within. That truth isn't in scriptures, but in experience. That what's right or wrong depends on how it affects people, not how it pleases a deity. Sounds normal, right? Like common sense? Well, it wasn't for most of history. For thousands of years, we thought only the gods had the answers, or the kings, or the popes. But then something shifted. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, people started listening to themselves. This wasn't one big event. It was a series of ripples. The Renaissance, the Enlightenment, revolutions in science, art, and politics. And what tied them together was the belief that humans matter. Humanism didn't kill religion. It just changed the question. Instead of asking, what does God want? We started asking, what do we want? It created new kinds of religions with names like liberalism, socialism, and nationalism. Each one told a different story. Liberalism said, the individual is sacred. Protect their rights, let them be free. Socialism said, the group is sacred. Share the wealth. Protect the weak. Nationalism said, the nation is sacred. Love your people. Defend your tribe. These ideologies clashed, cooperated, and shaped the modern world. But they all share one root, faith in humanity. That's why we built schools, hospitals, constitutions, voting booths. That's why we fought for civil rights and women's rights and workers' rights. Because we believe human lives have value. Not because a God said so, but because we felt it. Of course, humanism wasn't perfect. It could be hijacked, twisted, even weaponized. The Nazis believed in human greatness too, just for one group, not all. Other regimes claimed to represent the people, then silenced those very people. Because humanism, like any belief system, depends on who's telling the story. Still, it reshaped everything. Take art, for example. In medieval times, most paintings showed saints and angels. After humanism, portraits of ordinary people. Selfies of the soul, centuries before smartphones. Take science. Instead of just decoding divine mysteries, scientists began asking, how does the human body work? What makes people happy or sick or smart? Psychology was born. Economics, sociology, biology, all focused on understanding us. And that obsession with understanding, it drove progress. Medicine cured more. Education spread wider. Technology reached deeper. But with all this power came a new challenge. If we are the center of meaning, then we're also the ones responsible when things go wrong. There's no God to blame for pollution, no demon causing poverty. No prophecy explaining global warming, just us. And that's scary, but it's also liberating. Because if we broke it, maybe we can fix it. That's the quiet promise of humanism. Not eternal bliss, not paradise. Just a chance to make the world a little better. One choice, one invention, one voice at a time. And it's this belief in progress, reason, freedom that launched the most explosive revolution in human history. It didn't start with a bang, but with a question. What if we don't know everything? And from that question, a whole new way of seeing the world was born. Let's dive into the scientific revolution. Imagine this. For most of human history, people believed that everything important was already known. Truth came from old books, ancient prophets, or long-dead philosophers. If you had a question, you didn't investigate. You quoted. Then something wild happened. People started to say, I don't know. And instead of being ashamed, they got curious. That's the heartbeat of the scientific revolution. It didn't begin with a new invention. It began with a mindset shift. A humble, bold, dangerous idea that ignorance is okay, even useful. Because if we admit we don't know something, we can learn, test, explore, improve. This revolution didn't make us gods. It made us explorers. And suddenly, the world transformed into one big question mark. What causes diseases? What lies across the ocean? What are stars made of? What happens inside an atom? Questions that had once been taboo or pointless were now invitations. Invitations to experiment, observe, and revise. Now, science isn't about certainty. It's about doubt, but structured, disciplined doubt. You make a guess, you test it, you share results. And if someone proves you wrong, great, that's progress. Compare that to ancient systems where challenging authority got you jailed. Or worse. But here's the twist. Science didn't thrive alone. It needed partners, unlikely ones, politics and economics. Because research costs money, instruments aren't cheap, and time in a lab, it needs to be funded. So science teamed up with empires and capitalism. Empires wanted better maps, better weapons, better medicines to conquer more efficiently. Capitalists wanted better machines, better products, better knowledge to make more profit. In return, scientists got ships, grants, labs, telescopes, and observatories. That's why the same century saw Newton's laws and global navigation, the microscope and the plantation, the thermometer and the transatlantic slave trade. Science expanded knowledge, but it also expanded power, and with power came contradiction. Take James Cook, for example, a brilliant explorer backed by the British Empire. He mapped lands, collected plants, observed new peoples, all in the name of science. But he also helped claim territories, spread diseases, and paved the way for colonization. So science isn't always innocent. It doesn't come with a built-in moral compass. It tells you how, not whether you should. You can use chemistry to make fertilizer or bombs, biology to cure cancer or justify racism. That's why science alone isn't enough. It needs to be guided by values. And those values? They don't come from test tubes. Still, the scientific revolution cracked open reality. In just a few centuries, we mapped the genome, split the atom, walked on the moon, built the internet, tracked black holes. We took a species that once feared thunder and gave it weather satellites. But for all our tech, there's still one question we haven't answered. What should we do with all this knowledge? Because power without purpose is dangerous. And that tension between capability and wisdom defines the modern world. Let's explore how this new science, once unleashed, helped birth two beasts, empire and capital. Let's talk about ambition. Not the kind where you want a raise or a better apartment. I mean the kind that redraws maps, builds armadas, sends men to die on foreign soil. That's empire. And when science showed up with its shiny tools and clever theories, empire saw an opportunity. Wait, it said, you can help me conquer smarter. Science nodded. Only if you fund me. So they shook hands and never looked back. See, empires always needed information. Where are the resources? What crops grow where? Which diseases kill soldiers? Where do the rivers flow? But before science, answers were guesswork. Rumors, hunches passed down like gossip. Science changed that. It gave empires maps that weren't just pretty, they were accurate. Charts that could guide ships, divide land, exploit trade winds. Instruments that could tell time across oceans. Medicines that kept sailors alive longer, so they could conquer further. Knowledge became power, literally, and the powerful became obsessed with knowledge. Not to enlighten the world, but to control it. Take Captain James Cook again. He didn't sail to Tahiti for vacation. He was carrying astronomers and botanists, tasked with observing the transit of Venus and collecting exotic flora. But behind the science, the empire was sharpening its knives. Science made conquest seem noble. Instead of, we're here to steal your land, it became, we're here to study your people. And once empires arrived, they didn't just collect taxes, they collected data. They studied local customs, languages, laws. Not to celebrate diversity, but to govern efficiently. It's easier to control a population when you understand its structure. Science became empire's notepad. But it wasn't a one-way street. Empire gave science a global stage. Without the colonial reach of Britain, France, or Spain, science would have remained a European hobby. Instead, it became a planetary project. Specimens from Brazil, fossils from Egypt, star charts from Australia. The whole world became a lab. It sounds thrilling, but also a little dirty, because science didn't ask nicely. It grabbed. It dissected. It often didn't care about consent. Explorers brought back more than facts. They brought stories about primitive tribes, backward cultures, inferior races. These weren't scientific truths. They were imperial justifications. See, they said, they need our help, our rule, our civilization. Science, twisted just a bit, became a weapon of legitimacy. That's how you get social Darwinism, chronometry, theories that ranked humans like livestock, always with white Europeans conveniently at the top. Now, to be fair, not all scientists played along. Many hated being used like that. But once science got into bed with empire, it was hard to untangle. And the seduction didn't stop there. While empires expanded across oceans, a different force was brewing in accounting houses and stock exchanges back home. A force built on credit, risk, and imagination. Let's now talk about capitalism, the empire of money. Picture this. A medieval merchant walks into a bank and asks for a loan. The banker leans in and says, "Sure, but how will you pay it back?" And the merchant replies, "Oh, I'll sell 1,000 crates of cinnamon ... from a place we haven't conquered yet, using ships we haven't built, with sailors we haven't hired." Sounds nuts, right? But the banker says, "Great, here's the gold." That's capitalism in a nutshell. Belief in the future. Not blind faith, but structured optimism. A system where people invest not because they're certain, but because they believe things will grow. And this belief, it changed everything. Before capitalism, wealth was static. If you had a pie and someone else wanted a slice, you lost some. Gain and loss were a zero-sum game. The rich stayed rich by keeping others out. Capitalism flipped the script. It whispered, "What if we bake more pies?" So people started taking risks. Loans were given. Businesses launched. Trade routes opened. But here's the catch. Credit only works if people trust tomorrow. That trust that tomorrow will be richer than today is the foundation of capitalism. Without it, the system crumbles. And who keeps the trust alive? Governments, banks, and scientists. Governments enforce contracts. Banks move capital. Scientists fuel growth with inventions. It's a powerful trio. But capitalism doesn't just need money. It needs growth. Constant, endless, breathless growth. And that's why it gobbles up resources, expands markets, colonizes minds. Growth becomes sacred. If your economy grows 1% a year, you're in trouble. 3%? That's okay. 5? Now we're talking. Stagnation is failure. Shrinkage is panic. So capitalism pushes forward always. To feed that engine, it needs profits. And to make profits, businesses must be efficient. That's why factories exist. That's why kids sell lemonade. That's why your fridge beeps when it's open too long. Everything must earn its keep. And yet, capitalism isn't just greed in a suit. It's also behind the best parts of modern life. Abundant food, global travel, instant communication, life-saving drugs. Why? Because someone somewhere saw an opportunity and chased it. Still, capitalism has a shadow. Left unchecked, it consumes people just like it consumes forests. Workers become tools. Communities become markets. The environment becomes a resource list. It doesn't mean capitalism is evil. It means it needs brakes, boundaries, ethics. That's where politics enters. Liberal democracies try to balance freedom with fairness, taxes with incentives, regulation with innovation. Not always successfully, but that's the goal. And remember, capitalism doesn't care what it sells, as long as it sells. Shoes, sugar, submarines, social media, slave labor. All can be packaged and profited from. Which means morality must come from outside the system, from values, laws, movements. That's why capitalism and imperialism got along so well. Empires offered new lands, cheap labor, fresh consumers. Capitalism brought the ships, the bankers, the merchants. Together, they reshaped the planet. They dug mines in Africa, laid railroads in India, built plantations in the Caribbean, not to uplift, but to extract. Still, capitalism is not a conspiracy. It's not run by a secret cabal. It's driven by billions of everyday decisions. What you buy, what you sell, what you save. That's the paradox. It's a system built on individual choice, but it reshapes society on a massive scale. So we need to ask, if capitalism is everywhere, shaping everything, what kind of consumer choices are we really making? And how did consumption become not just an activity, but a lifestyle? Time to explore the rise of consumerism. Let's imagine a modern day. You wake up to an alarm on your phone. Maybe order coffee through an app. Grab breakfast, cereal from Brazil, milk from New Zealand. Slip into jeans made in Bangladesh, sneakers from Vietnam. Then hop on a train that runs on electricity from a distant dam or gas field. What ties all this together? The Industrial Revolution, the real engine behind the world we live in. And it began not with steam or coal, but with energy and conversion. For thousands of years, humans relied on muscle. Yours or that of an ox or donkey. Sure, there were windmills and water wheels, but they were limited. You couldn't power a city on a breeze. Then someone figured out how to unlock the ancient energy trapped in fossil fuels. Coal, oil, gas. These were compressed time capsules. Dead plants and animals, buried for millions of years, transformed into pure power. And when we learned how to burn them, everything changed. Steam engines pumped mines, moved trains, drove looms. Electricity lit up homes. Gasoline put engines on wheels. Suddenly, energy wasn't just abundant, it was mobile. Now pair that with factories. In the past, if you wanted a chair, a blacksmith carved it by hand. Maybe one a day. With industrial machines, you could churn out hundreds, all identical, all fast. That's efficiency. That's scale. And to feed those machines, you needed raw materials, cotton, copper, rubber, iron. So you dug deeper, colonized harder, extracted faster. The world became a supply chain. But machines can't run themselves. So what about the people? Welcome to the working class. Farmers abandoned fields and flooded into cities. Families lived in cramped flats. Children worked long hours. Smoke choked the skies. But wages came in regular, and food came in cans. Industrialization didn't make life easy. It made it predictable. And that predictability allowed something wild to grow: consumer culture. See, once you build 1,000,000 chairs, you've got to sell them. So businesses stopped just making stuff. They started selling desires: comfort, style, status, convenience. They marketed dreams. You didn't just want clothes. You wanted fashion. Not just soap, freshness. Not just a car, freedom. And when people bought in, the system hummed louder. Now, production fueled consumption, and consumption justified more production. It became a loop. And to keep the loop spinning, you needed happy consumers. Not just fed, but content. Not just working, but believing. That's where politics, education, and even entertainment pitched in, shaping people into workers by day, buyers by night. Of course, there were winners and losers. Some nations industrialized fast and rich. Others were left supplying the raw materials, stuck in poverty, debt, or colonization. But no matter where you were, the machine kept turning. And here's the funny thing: even revolutions couldn't stop it. The USSR industrialized too, so did Maoist China. They just gave it different slogans. Because once the engine of growth was lit, no one wanted to go back to hand tools. And today, that engine runs 24/7, factories across continents, cargo ships crisscrossing oceans, billion-dollar economies built on products no one really needs, but everyone wants. All made possible by the invisible heartbeat of the modern world: energy turned into motion. But there's a cost: polluted air, rising seas, collapsing ecosystems, burnout. The question is no longer, can we grow? It's, should we keep growing like this? Because the same fire that powers our lives might just be what burns it all down. Before we get there, let's zoom in on the final ingredient that reshaped the modern era: the idea that you, yes, you, are the center of the universe. Let's meet the modern individual. All right, deep breath, because this one hits close to home. We used to live in a world where nothing really changed. Your great-grandparents farmed. Your grandparents farmed. You farmed. Same crops, same tools, same gods, same stories. Life moved in circles, not in lines. But today, you wake up and your phone's operating system updated while you slept. The news changed. The market changed. Your job might not even exist in 5 years. We live inside a permanent revolution. And that shift from static traditions to constant upheaval is not natural. It's something humans created, on purpose. Here's how it happened. For most of history, we believed the golden age was behind us, that the best days were in the past. People didn't crave progress, they feared it. New was risky. Old was sacred. But something flipped during the scientific revolution and spread during capitalism's rise. We started believing the future could be better than the past if we made it so. And that belief, that faith in progress, it became a global religion. It gave birth to new ideologies: liberalism, socialism, communism, nationalism, all promising a better tomorrow. Each had its own recipe: more freedom, more efficiency, more glory. But they agreed on one thing: we're not done yet. We must keep building, innovating, evolving. And so, governments turned into project managers, schools into training grounds, science into a gold mine. People became tools for progress. Your education, your job, even your love life, all measured against the future you're told to chase. And capitalism? Oh, it loved this. Because people chasing progress are perfect customers. They want the next phone, the next car, the next career move. They don't sit still. Even happiness became a to-do list. You should be richer, healthier, fitter, more productive, better looking, more mindful, less anxious, more social, but also more independent. It never ends. We've turned life into a race where the finish line keeps moving. And if you pause, you're told you're falling behind. So here we are, in a world that runs on restlessness. And yet, strangely, this constant change has become the new normal. Your grandparents might have had one job. You'll have 6. Your parents stayed in one city. You'll cross countries. Maybe you already have. And the thing is, it's exhausting, but also kind of thrilling. Because never before have individuals had so much freedom to reinvent themselves, to break out of caste, class, or gender roles, to build identities from scratch. You're not just who your parents were. You're a mix of books, songs, memes, side hustles, and TikToks. And yet, this freedom, it comes at a price. With tradition gone, you become your own compass. That's liberating, but also lonely. No one tells you what to believe anymore. You have to figure it out, pick your values, find your tribe, design your life. And you better make it look good on Instagram. So while we broke free from rigid past, we built a new pressure to constantly update, upgrade, outperform, even yourself. We live in beta, which raises a big question. If everything's always changing, what stays the same? What still anchors us, gives us meaning, helps us sleep at night? Let's explore that. Let's talk about meaning, religion, nation, identity, and the modern search for purpose. Let's talk about the story we're all chasing, the happy ending. It's funny, isn't it? We've reshaped the world in every direction. Raised life expectancy, tamed hunger, cured diseases, built cities that glow like fireflies at night. But the real question is, are we happier? Because isn't that the whole point? And honestly, it's complicated. Let's rewind. For most of history, life was short, painful, and uncertain. Childbirth could kill. Toothaches turned deadly. Winters brought starvation. Happiness wasn't a goal. Survival was. Today, we've made miracles feel normal. Antibiotics, airplanes, air conditioning. And yet, anxiety, depression, loneliness, all rising. So, what gives? Well, for one, we've confused comfort with joy. We assume that if we just remove suffering, happiness would bloom like a spring flower. But comfort doesn't guarantee contentment. You can lie on a memory foam mattress and still feel empty. Then there's expectation inflation. Our ancestors were happy with a full belly and a warm bed. Now, we want that, plus emotional fulfillment, plus work-life balance, plus six-pack abs, plus a job with meaning, plus a vacation to Bali. We moved the goalposts. And once happiness became a target, it became slippery. Because the more you chase it, the more it slips away. There's also the question of comparison. Back in a village of 200 people, you might have been the best baker or strongest ox cart puller. Respect came easy. But now, you open your phone and scroll past billionaires, models, influencers, geniuses. Every day is a reminder that someone's doing better. And don't get me started on chemicals. You see, happiness isn't just a mindset. It's biology. Serotonin, dopamine, endorphins. Evolution didn't design us to be joyful all the time. It designed us to survive. And sometimes that means being restless, anxious, even sad. Just enough to keep searching. So even if your life is objectively amazing, your brain might still whisper, not enough. But maybe the biggest twist in the happiness story? We don't actually know what makes us happy. Studies show lottery winners aren't wildly happier after a year. Paraplegics aren't as miserable as we'd expect. People who spend on experiences often feel better than those who buy things, but we still chase things anyway. So we guess, we try, we stumble. We invent myths that love will fix it, or a house, or kids, or success. And when it doesn't, we swipe, shop, scroll, desperate for a dopamine hit. Still, don't lose hope. Because despite all this, humans do find joy in music, in friendship, in laughing so hard your stomach hurts, in watching your kids sleep, in sunsets, in stories, especially in stories. And that's what happiness really is. Not a constant state, but moments. Spikes on the graph. A collection of tiny, shining things. We just have to notice them. Because in the race to optimize everything, we often forget the obvious. Life isn't a spreadsheet. It's a mess. A beautiful, tangled mess. And sometimes, The happiest people aren't the richest or the smartest, just the ones who know how to pay attention. Which brings us to our final stop. We've talked about past, present, and future. But let's ask a bigger question, one that echoes louder with every passing year. What do we want to become? Chapter 20, The End of Homo Sapiens. So here we are, standing at the edge of a cliff, peering into the fog of the future. And the view? It's wild. Because this next chapter isn't just about better tech or smarter cities. It's about becoming something else entirely. We spent the last 70,000 years shaping the world to fit us. Now, we're starting to reshape ourselves. We're not talking about eyeglasses or vaccines anymore. We're talking genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, cyborg enhancement, lab-grown organs, even digital consciousness. This isn't science fiction. It's happening. In labs, in code, in clinical trials. The question is no longer, what can humans do? It's becoming, what should humans become? Because for the first time in history, we're gaining the power to tweak evolution itself, not over millennia, but in a few decades. Imagine designing your baby, not just to avoid disease, but to be taller, smarter, more athletic. Imagine uploading parts of your mind into the cloud, backing up memories like Google Photos. Imagine merging with machines, not wearing tech, but becoming tech. This isn't just Homo sapiens 2.0. It's possibly the end of Homo sapiens. And that raises a terrifying, beautiful, messy tangle of questions. If we can upgrade ourselves endlessly, are we still human? If algorithms understand our feelings better than we do, who's really in charge? If a machine feels pain, does it deserve rights? If your grandchild never dies, will they still value life? And here's the thing, we're rushing into this future not because we're wise, but because we're curious. Because we can, and because someone else will if we don't. So the race is on, between biology and silicon, between ethics and ambition, between wonder and risk. We might become gods, or we might self-destruct. And unlike previous revolutions, this one won't just change our jobs, our homes, our politics. It could rewrite the definition of person, erase the boundary between flesh and code, turn life into a design project. And the people making these decisions, coders, scientists, CEOs, military officers, people not necessarily trained in philosophy, but armed with tools powerful enough to reshape life. That's why it matters that we pay attention, that we ask hard questions, that we stop and think not just about how we can do something, but why. Because the next few decades won't just determine what kind of world we live in. They'll determine who or what lives in it. Maybe we'll become something wiser, kinder, more connected. Or maybe we'll chase perfection and lose what made us human in the first place. Either way, the story doesn't end here. It just changes authors. And you, me, all of us, we're still writing it. If this journey sparked something in you, a thought, a question, a sense of awe, then do consider supporting the mind behind it all. Yuval Noah Harari poured years of research, passion, and vision into Sapiens. This retelling is just one way to experience it. But the original book, it's richer, deeper, and filled with details no summary can capture. So if you can, buy the official copy. Hold it in your hands. Highlight your favorite lines. Lend it to a friend. Keep it on your shelf like a compass for the human story. It's not just a book, it's a thank you to the author. A way to keep brilliant ideas alive and growing. And honestly, it's worth every page.